Good evening and welcome to this webinar. We are live on Zoom and we are live on Facebook with myself, Ruth Benny from Top Schools. And I'm joined this evening by Renée Boey from Bloom KKCA Academy. Good evening, Renée.
Good evening, Ruth. Hi, everyone.
Hi. Thank you for joining us. If you have any questions, if you're watching this live, there's a Q&A function on Zoom, there's a comments box on Facebook, and if you're watching this on catch up, go ahead and comment anyway, and we will get to them and reply to your questions. So Renée, tell us more about Bloom KKCA. And just before you do, I just want to prefix this. I mean, we're seeing quite a number of new schools starting up in recent years, even this year. And so it's so important that schools differentiate themselves from one another. And so for those of you who are listening, if you've listened in, you're obviously slightly curious. And Bloom is very much a school with a difference. So perhaps, Renée, you could highlight what those differences are.
Sure, let's dive right in. So we're beginning with a primary school, which we're launching this September 2021, and it will be a bilingual school of innovation. And we're also planning on building the secondary and opening within the next few years as well. So it will be a grade 1 through grade 12 school. And I think the fact that it is bilingual is already one way in which we are different from many other schools. And by bilingual, I'm referring to English and Putonghua Mandarin. So in addition to that, we're a school of innovation that uses pedagogy that is progressive. And when we say innovation, that term is another one of those words that many schools these days are embracing, which is great to see. But I think that defining it and making it concrete is hopefully what we'll be able to do in this conversation. And for us, to me, I think that innovation is about solving new problems that we face and adapting to the way the world is changing and looking at things in a new way. And in doing that, we often have to also borrow from the past. So it isn't always just about embracing everything new and novel, but also building upon the best of classical education. So you will see people in our team who are very well versed in classical education, who have come from very established schools and understand what is working in those schools. So as we innovate, we're actually trying to think, well, what is the leading edge where we should be innovating, and what is wonderful and working in traditional models that we should be preserving. And project-based learning is one of the approaches that we adopt among several different things that we do differently, and a great emphasis on social emotional learning and through positive education. So I think that's, if I can just set the stage that way, those are the main areas in which we focus our creative energies.
Sure, there's a lot to unpack there. So a bilingual school of innovation. We'll get to the bilingual part maybe later. I think the more interesting part is innovation. And I know that, you are obviously also, you're not starting a school from zero. So I think it'd be interesting if you could just explain a little bit about your background and, your experience with the existing Hong Kong schools and why you thought it was now was the right time to open a new school of innovation.
Absolutely. So I've been in education for over 15 years, 17 years now. I've taught in IB schools, in local schools. I also used to teach in schools in the United States. And I've studied in different countries, including Hong Kong, US, UK, and Japan. And so I've been exposed to different models. But in addition to teaching in traditional schools, I also 7 years ago founded an educational organization, K through 12 education organization called Baker and Bloom. And I think building this school is really a culmination of several things, one of which is running and starting Baker and Bloom and getting to work with many different students from different schools. And the second is my work with what my husband and his family started, which is Cocoon Foundation, which is a nonprofit focused on entrepreneurship education. And I think it's the largest nonprofit effort to do that in the past in Hong Kong right now. And we're working with over 40 schools with 8,000 secondary students there. And finally, I've been working on the Harvard Book Prize for the past 6 years. I chaired it for 4 years, and I'm still on the committee, very active there. And there's a program and a scholarship mentorship program there where we get to work with over 240 secondary schools in Hong Kong each year, and get to meet with students and read their application essays. So this is a program to send students abroad to the Harvard Summer School, but also to, there's an essay prize and to mentor young people. So that gives me a broader exposure to school system in Hong Kong, many different types of schools, and different types of people, young people in Hong Kong. And the entrepreneurship education part with Cocoon, we actually run workshops within schools, design thinking workshops. We get entrepreneurs, local entrepreneurs, as well as people who have global backgrounds, to speak to students, run corporate challenge. We're doing one just this week with Coca-Cola. We've done them with IKEA. And we do job shadowing and internships, and really push young people to think about ways to solve problems, and not just like run a startup or start a business, but to think about how you can add value. And I think going back to building this school, after running Baker and Bloom for the past 7 years, actually starting 3 years ago, I began to notice a lot of recurring patterns in students. So Baker and Bloom, just to clarify, it's an after-school education center, and we focus on creative literacy. So we do that through academic ways as well as more creative ways. So creative writing, public speaking, but also a lot of project-based learning. And we do test prep as well, and we do admissions. But I think that broad exposure made me understand that even in very successful schools that people really, work very hard to get into, there are many problems in terms of the learning and the restrictions that that students and teachers face. Because I think that, I'm very mindful that, having worked in these schools myself, and I have children myself, it's nobody's fault in a way. But a lot of times we are all trying to work with the parameters that we're given, and there is and precisely because I felt like when I was teaching in a school, I could do great things in the classroom, like, run a medieval simulation, a Renaissance fair, publish really creative poetry. But that's sort of within a classroom level of innovation. And with Baker and Bloom, we were able to cut across every discipline. And, when we're teaching literature, we can make connections between history and art and religion. And we can use very contemporary topical texts and what's happening in the news. And there's like a lot of autonomy and freedom. But at the same time, we're working outside of the school system. And the main course and the main core experience of most children is really going to school. So I felt that as an educator, I also have the responsibility to try to do something about that core experience. And I really felt compelled to. And I could see many interesting things being tried across different schools, but not all of it put together in a coherent, innovative model. So I think maybe that's what's different about our school. We're not just incorporating 1 or 2 new programs and plugging it into a system, but rather reimagining what school can look like, what the timetable can look like, what the content can look like, how we teach, what the furniture looks like. So yeah, sorry, that was a rather long answer, but I wanted to share a little bit about my own journey and what we're trying to do here.
Sure. I mean, we can clearly see that you're passionate about this. I just want to clarify, because of course I'm a parent too, and just for those parents listening, I mean, isn't that what the IB framework can do? To some more forward-thinking educators within the IB framework. There's lots of freedom and room for innovation. Is there not?
Yes, so I taught MYP and diploma program, and I've worked at Baker and Bloom. We have many teachers who've taught IB as well, and PYP too. And I think I was initially very drawn to the IB as a teacher, and I chose to teach at an IB school to be trained that way because I really like, in particular, the holistic emphasis of IB and the intercultural understanding, which are core to its philosophy. And I think when we use the term IB, it actually stretches across 12 years, right? So PYP is a very different program from MYP, the middle year programs, which is also very different from the diploma program. And I think that so our school is not an IB school, meaning our exit qualification, we use A levels and advanced placement to give our students more options in terms of where they can apply to for university, as well as flexibility, which some flexibility that IB does not offer. So for example, if we're talking about the lower years, there is a lot of freedom, I think, and the PYP uses a lot of inquiry-driven methods that we also use, and I really like the cross-disciplinary approach. So we definitely learn a lot from PYP. And it isn't to say that what we're doing might not align very well with what they're doing in the PYP program. But we're actually also adding many elements and topics that we feel are very relevant and future facing. And at the same time, moving towards the middle year program, there are also specific disciplines, assessment frameworks that you have to use. And I feel that sometimes as a teacher planning, there's a huge burden when you have to go through all those assessment frameworks before you can think about, well, what's the content I'm supposed to teach? What are the standards? Which standards am I going to use? Then align it with the IB assessment framework. There's a lot of planning that an individual teacher needs to do. And I feel that sometimes there is a huge variance across IB schools in terms of what that ends up looking like. And when you get a great team of teachers working together collaboratively across disciplines, it does look great. But the reality is sometimes schools don't give teachers a lot of time to do that cross-subject, cross-disciplinary work. And that's one thing that our school does. We have a half day where students will have options, very rich options in terms of enrichment, sports, music, and STEM education. But teachers will always have time to collaborate and to plan the cross grade levels and across subjects. So I think that's something I learned from visiting over 30 innovative schools from around the world. And whenever I visit a school, I talk to the principal or the people who are the directors of the building, and talk about how they manage their teams and what allows them to do the wonderful project-based learning or whatever approach they use that they find so exciting. And inevitably, timetabling comes up. And I was quite intrigued by that because, of course, as a teacher, I'm not really in charge of timetabling, but I realized that sometimes the leaders of the school believe in it, but maybe by the time they join the school, the timetabling, the scheduling has been decided. And often it takes even years to come up with a timetable blocking system that everybody agrees with. So it's really hard to make some of these reforms, even if you're a great visionary principal stepping in, or a teacher who wants to collaborate, but you can't get all the right department heads together. And then when we get to the diploma level, there's even more rigidity to what is required. And I do use that word with some hesitation, because I don't want to imply that there's no room for choice. But I do think that, for example, I was just talking to a parent today who has a child who wants to do bioengineering. And we were discussing course options in an IB school. And it's very hard to double up on chemistry, on physics, on computer science, well, triple, I guess. Whereas even in the A levels, you can do that and do math, which are 4 subjects that if you are to do bioengineering, you would want. And it's much easier to do that with AP and A levels. So while I truly appreciate the liberal arts grounding that an IB secondary education provides, I think it may not be for everyone. And if we're talking about being future ready, depth is also important. We are looking at a world that demands people to look T-shaped, right? To have that range and also have that depth. And I think IB does a great job with that scope, that range. And I feel sometimes you can sort of do that before the final 2 years and give students a little more room to specialize in those last 2 years. So those are just some of the things. I mean, we could get into more specifics, but hopefully that's a start. Oh, sorry,
Yeah,
Ruth.
That's a lot, and we talked yesterday as well. So I've got pages and pages of notes. Thank you for everyone who's watching. If you have questions, There's nothing that Renee can't answer, I promise you. And we're happy to answer those questions live. Equally, if you'd like to message us privately. I would like to pick up on a lot of what you've said. Let's go to the team, because it's interesting what you say. I mean, we work with schools in Hong Kong. Most of them are rather large. Now you're aiming to grow a school, obviously not from absolutely zero, but from small beginnings. And you've been putting a team together, and you talked about how the leadership, and we absolutely believe in this as well, how it all flows down from the top. So maybe you could just share a little bit about who is at the top, including yourself, and how,
Yes.
The team.
We have a great team. And honestly, I think that's probably the most confidence instilling part of what we're doing. Our STEM program director, Ms. Mei Chen, has been teaching at Baker and Bloom for the past 5 years. So we've also been working together already, over the past few years. She's a former NASA engineer, a Lockheed Martin engineer, who also has experience in other companies like Microsoft in the Silicon Valley. So she's really coming into education from an industry perspective. And she also in Hong Kong initially was an entrepreneur and built a very successful business before joining us in Baker and Bloom. Her father was an engineer, her mother was as a teacher, so she's sort of a perfect blend of the two. And we have Miss Rebecca Bush, who currently runs our pilot program at Baker and Bloom. She runs also the primary division of Baker and Bloom, and she is one of 3 registered reading specialists in Hong Kong with experience working with kids with dyslexia and other learning needs. And she also has taught at various international schools in Hong Kong herself, and is a very experienced educator in bilingual schools. We're having extensive experience in Latin America. Her degree is actually in Iberian studies, so she's trilingual herself. Everyone on the team is at least bilingual, if not multilingual. And we also have Chinese teachers who all have masters in education, in teaching Chinese either as a first language or a second language. So that's very important to me, that we have very qualified teachers in every subject and specialty and experience in that, bringing that depth. We have a wonderful director of innovation who has experience working in maker spaces and also in art education. So I think that's going to shape our ECS curriculum. Our ECS curriculum is our explore, create, and share, what we call ECS, which is the project-based learning curriculum. Okay, so it's integrated into curriculum.
Into the curriculum.
Yes, it's part of the weekly curriculum.
Okay. Just clarify for us what the Director of Innovation does, because that's not a title that we're used to seeing in a school.
Yeah. So it's actually a very comprehensive role, and it includes training all our teachers in project-based learning, because this is not something that every teacher has experience in. And it's very different. I do want to say project-based learning has roots that go very deep. John Dewey was around, one of the first proponents of what we now call project-based education, was around a century ago, learning by doing, one of his philosophies. But I think what it has evolved to be, and what we now call PBL, is quite different. Learning through making projects, doing projects, is quite different from having a project at the end, tagged on the end of a unit. So let's say we learn a lot of facts about the Industrial Revolution, we watch videos, you're quizzed, you're tested on it, the content, and at the end you do a project. That is a little bit different from starting with a driving question. And the question might be, if you're doing the Industrial Revolution, like, what is human progress? And that's a much broader question. So with that in mind, children can actually develop projects that are different from one another. So there's that element of choice and options in the process of PBL. And then what is the whole process of identifying a problem within that bigger question that you want to work on, creating an exploration or a project, a research paper perhaps, or it could be an actual product. What in ECS, we really focus on creating products of change. So for us, our school mission is to cultivate compassionate creators and social innovators. And that's why we don't just want them to create a beautiful, let's say, a model of what a factory used to look like during the Industrial Revolution. But actually, how is this product relevant to today? What type of change might it create or spark? Instead, we'd really like them to form connection with the society and the neighborhood around them, or even just the school community or the global community. So I think that that's something that's quite special about our school as well. And going back to the team, though, we also have people who, and the director of innovation. So connecting us to a network of innovative schools is something that she will be in charge of. She actually herself is already a leader in this field and does a lot of conferences, presentations, knows a lot of people in the field. They also train teachers to use the maker space. You know, if you teach English language like myself, you may not know how to use a laser cutter or 3D printer. You may not even see the relevance of that to teaching your subject. But I think what the director of innovation is doing is to get the teachers to start thinking, well, what about your field might be enhanced in terms of being more innovative, connecting it to the real world? What are digital tools that might help you do that? And so in many ways, it's in-house professional development for the teachers to have this person. I suppose you could say that even just having someone like her, and also the director of STEM, May, from the very start, as we build our curriculum now, before our school starts, and pilot it with actual students, we are very different. We're not taking a curriculum and making little modifications and like, oh, we could do a little bit of STEM here and a little bit of STEM there. But we're thinking, as May likes to say, it's not a Band-Aid solution, but we're building the skeleton, right, from inside out. There is STEAM integrated and creativity injected into every unit.
Okay.
So yes, wonderful team working closely together.
Yeah, we have a few questions, and I want to take, Tiffany has quite a number of questions. Thank you, Tiffany. But I want to take one of her questions because I think this is a good point. Everything that you're saying kind of makes sense. I think instinctively as parents, like we feel that at least I do, like that what you're saying makes sense. But I wonder if we can sort of make that more concrete. And
Sure.
So Tiffany's asked, and I think it's a really good question. Could you sort of describe what would a typical day be like for, say, a 6-year-old?
Yes. So we begin the day with campfire. And campfire is another distinctive feature of our school. We teach a positive education curriculum through campfire, which is also done in both English and Chinese. And the main curriculum comes from the Institute of Positive Education, which is based in Geelong Grammar School in Australia, one of the oldest boarding schools in Australia. And we also add the Chinese curriculum, which incorporates a lot of traditional Chinese virtues and values. And campfire is done not just in the opening of the day, but in the close of the day as well. After campfire, you'll have your core academic classes. So even though we are project-based in many ways, we actually balance that creativity and progressiveness with academic rigor. And so in the 3 core subjects of primary school, namely literacy and numeracy, and literacy we do in Chinese and English language arts and math class, you get that every day. And we have long blocks, close to an hour, sometimes a little longer, in fact. And in between those classes, there's also recess and breaks, of course. Actually, sorry, I should say that before campfire, we have morning routines just to get kids. It might be some warm-up exercises. It might be even just getting them to line up and put their bags in the right place and all of that in the cubbies. After that, we do the campfire, which has also like skits and reading and role playing, all of that to get their brains warmed up and get the community gathered. In many ways, that's like what circle time is in kindergarten. Very easy to understand. But actually, you don't do that a lot in primary school. And for building a community and the social emotional learning, that's very important. That's where you resolve maybe issues, conflict between kids or things they're struggling with as a class, and making connections about social emotional growth. And then we move into the academic side. And then we also have art class. And within arts, we have visual arts and music, which in grade 1 and 2 are taught in Chinese, and then grade 3 onwards is taught in English. And then we have PE, which again, grade 1 and 2 is also taught in Chinese. And then we also twice a week have the project-based learning classes. And every week, and this is very special, every single week we have a field trip. So you get on a bus, you go out there for at least 3 hours. And it might be visiting a museum. I can give you an example of one of the recent field trips. All the students went to the Bank of China. And what they were doing was holding an SCMP article where there was a wild boar in the fountain of the Bank of China. Very mysterious, because these wild boars in this very urban environment. And so they were pig detectives. They were there to figure out what the pigs were doing in the fountain. But of course, we also use things like visible thinking routines, like see, think, wonder. First, they looked at the image, they came up with their own reasons for why that might be happening, sort of a hypothesis. And then they went there and they were holding the image. And at first, they were actually in the wrong fountain. But because they looked very carefully at the reflection on the side of the fountain, the rock, which was glistening with water, they saw the image of the Murray building. So they then realized they were in the wrong place, and that applied, like they were learning about reflections in math too. So the teacher pointed that out, and then they navigated and found the actual exact location the photo was taken. And they began to think, where could the pigs have come from? Then they contacted the security guards, and the children, it was all led by the children. They asked where these pigs came from. They didn't know. And they said, maybe botanical gardens across the street. And so off they went to the botanical gardens, and the teachers asked them, like, how would you find out where the pigs came from? So they again came up with the hypothesis, like maybe we could ask people who go to the park a lot, and someone came up with the idea of asking the park rangers. So they identified the park office, and found two people who only spoke Chinese, and they communicated with them. And they found out that it actually came from the peak. The pigs probably, they speculated, came down not from the mid-levels but from the peak, and they probably entered through the fence. And there was an old fence, a new fence. So they walked the perimeter of the park. They were also learning about that, perimeters, and found some holes in the old fence where the size of which would allow a pig to go through. So anyways, the next week they went to the peak. They took the peak tram. The next field trip, they went up. They looked around at the habitat, and they could look down into the city and see how integrated nature is with our urban environment in Hong Kong. So because the whole unit was actually on natural habitats, and how they're urban habitats for wild creatures as well. And then they also actually called the Department of Fisheries and Agriculture, and found that there were, like 10 years ago, 2 case officers culling the boars, and to today there are 100 of them. So it's actually, they learned about the statistics, the data behind what's going on with the wild boars. Anyways, just to bring it back, field trips, that's something they would experience on a weekly basis, not just in English but in Chinese as well. And what else is there every week? So the half day I mentioned, and after school, school ends around 3:30, and some students, if they wish, can stay behind, and we have a rich offering of enrichment activities, everything from chess, international chess, to Chinese Wei Qi, so Go, and wushu, and also different, like basketball, different types of sports, and musical instruments, calligraphy. So lots of things to do after school as well. So it's 5 days. We don't have Saturdays, except there is a forest adventure program on Saturday, should you choose to join that. And I should mention forest education is part of our school too. So
we don't have time to mention everything.
Okay, let's not get into that. Sure.
Project-based. There is so much I wanted to get onto, if I can, just a little segment at the end. We are running out of time. I want to get to ask you a little bit about the Wellbeing program, Renee, but just before we do, sure. Everything that you've described, again, it might seem a little bit abstract to some parents. So I think it's very useful to package that up into a typical P1 day. And then Pauline asks a very good question. Does that mean that it's only suitable for certain types of learners? Thank you for your question, Pauline. What's your view on that, Renee?
I don't think so, because I think that all children are multisensory learners. We also definitely, I believe that people have learning preferences. That's something that at Baker and Bloom, we actually help kids discover their learning styles and different preferences. But actually, there's also a lot of research to debunk that whole theory that we only learn in one way. Humans are very adaptable beings. And in fact, as a future-oriented school, we want our kids to be more adaptable. So I think training them to learn in more ways than in a traditional classroom, pen and paper type of setting is to their advantage, to their benefit. And we use traditional means as well. We have books, we have textbooks, we have, whiteboards and all of that. But it's just that we offer even more ways so that not only is that beneficial for people for whom traditional means may not be the best way to learn, but I think understanding that there is more than one way to learn, to solve problems, is helpful for everyone in training them to think in multiple paths, and which is an important part of being creative. Divergent thinking. And also, I think we do emphasize discipline in the classroom. It's not like we want kids to be unruly. That doesn't help learning at all. So in fact, our kids are very well behaved. And part of the importance of the positive education is to instill these values so that you do it for the right reasons, not because you're scared of being reprimanded, but because you have a concern for those around you, because you understand the consequences of your own behavior on others, and what self-regulation is too. So I think that's maybe that helps answer that it isn't just for a particular type of child. Although, very quick note, we have learning support. We have a director, Miss Rebecca Bush will be our director of learning support, which is not something every school has. And her role is to actually help students with individual needs. So they're sometimes pulled out of the classroom. Sometimes she steps into the classroom to work with students one-on-one or in small groups, and to train all our teachers in methods of differentiation. So I think that we also offer this personalization, which is very unique.
Good to know. Thank you, Renee. So just to recap, this is probably going to be your last chance to ask any questions. So Bloom KKCA Academy opening in the heart of Kowloon in Shek Kip Mei in August this year, 2021. Yes. And Bloom have been posting some answers to questions, and if you would like to know more, go and visit the school, then please get in touch with them directly. If you have any more questions, please go ahead. Otherwise, I would just like to sort of maybe bring this round. I mean, you talked about, it obviously sounds super fun, sounds nothing like when I went to school for my primary days. But it's very different from maybe what most children experience in a Hong Kong school. And so I think it's probably important to mention at this point, you're not an international school. You welcome children from all backgrounds with all passports. Yes. And that leads me to the next question about well-being. And we talked yesterday about resilience, because so many children that we meet nowadays are stressed. Yes. So, if children are currently maybe not super happy in their current schooling situation, assuming that they go to school every day, how will you be looking after their children's well-being?
Yes, there are many ways in which we do that, but I think first of all, to have a homeroom teacher that you trust is very important. And all our homeroom teachers are actually teachers we selected because they care about this. And so I think the fact that our teachers will be receiving training in positive education from the Institute of Positive Education, which embeds these values and the emphasis on personal strengths among the whole community. So it's also about staff relations, right? Like seeing how adults take care of each other is important, and also how adults handle stress. And for example, our teachers will discuss with students if over the weekend something stressful happened to them and how they dealt with it, and the emotions, naming the emotions that they feel, and explaining and sharing that in a rather vulnerable way, but in many ways making students feel like this is a safe space to share their anxieties, which they may not be comfortable sharing even with their parents or siblings. And then I think maintaining that positive environment and inclusive environment within the classroom. The very fact that we are an inclusive school, we accept students who have special needs that we can cater to. And also we have financial aid, so we have a diversity in background. I think that's also very important. It sets the tone for the type of school we are. And children are very smart. They pick up on those cues. And also, I think growth mindset, which everybody, is beginning to talk about, but really we've been doing from the get-go. I was doing it in 2008 when Carol Dweck first started publishing her book about that. But I think also with that, what we're trying to say is that it's okay to fail, that intelligence is not a fixed quantity, but something that you can grow, and embracing risk taking and failure as the natural part of learning. Teachers fail, adults fail, we make mistakes. What matters is pick yourself up, reflect on it, admit your mistakes when that happens, but also investigate. Like, so very quick example. A girl was in our class designing a propeller. It went the wrong way because it actually ripped. And instead of telling her, well, you didn't do it right, here's how you fix it, the teacher actually asked, well, why don't you figure out what happened? And so she realized that the vortex changes when there's that cut. And because of that, she started experimenting with different shapes and different designs, and she ended up having the fastest propeller. So I think, that's how the way the teachers speak to students is how we address those emotional needs. It's okay. What can you learn? Speaking positively to them, and also holding them accountable. Like with online learning, there are periods where it's not always live teaching because we want to limit some of the screen time. But at the end of every day, we meet again, just as with the real in-person learning, there's the campfire at the end, and we check in on them. Did you finish the work for the day? If you didn't, can you explain why? And I think it's not reprimanding them, but I think holding them responsible and accountable is also important. So that's kind of how we do it, through personal relationships. Yeah.
Thank you, Renée. We have covered a lot. I'm mindful that it's getting late, and thank you for everybody who joined us. If you're watching live on Facebook or on Zoom, or if you're watching this on catch up, thank you so much. How can we get to find out more? We can visit. Is your school open for visits?
Yes, so Baker and Bloom is where we're holding our info sessions, and where we're running our classes right now, which is in Admiralty across from Pacific Place 3. You can find that on our website. The school website is www.bloom.edu.hk, and
we'll
our next info
links.
session is on March 9th.
Great, thank you. And we'll post all of those links, and we'll be in touch with everybody who registered beforehand. Thank you so much, Renée. This has been super fun, and hopefully we'll get to meet in real life very soon. Thank you to everybody who was watching this evening, and have a good rest of the evening. For now, this is myself, Ruth from Top Schools. Good night, and thank you to Renée from Bloom KKCA Academy. Thanks, Renée.
Thanks very much, Ruth.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Good night, everyone.